The boardroom on the 38th floor of the Caldwell Tower smelled like leather and old money, the kind of room where everything was designed to make you feel smaller than you actually were. And that was the point. Ethan Corbett knew it the moment he stepped inside. He was 37 years old, a single father, and the founder of a logistics software company that had quietly become one of the most efficient supply chain systems in the country. He hadn't come from old money or connected families or the right schools. He had come from a two-bedroom apartment in Sudbury where the heat cut out every February and his father worked double shifts at the mill. What he had built, NorthPath Systems, he had built from scratch, from a laptop on a kitchen table while his daughter slept in the next room. And now the Alderton Group wanted to buy it. Not him, it. The distinction he would come to understand was everything. There were 6 of them seated at the table when he arrived. 4 lawyers, a financial officer, and at the head of it all, seated with the particular ease of a man who had never once doubted his own authority. Gordon Alderton, 71, patriarch of the Alderton Group, a real estate and infrastructure empire that stretched from Halifax to Vancouver and touched nearly everything in between. To his right sat his daughter, Sylvia Alderton Crane, early 50s, polished in the way that took decades and significant money to achieve. She didn't look up when Ethan entered. She was reviewing something on a tablet, and she continued reviewing it for a full 30 seconds after he sat down, which was not an oversight. It was a signal. A junior lawyer slid the offer across the table without introduction. Thick. Immaculate. The number on the cover sheet was $340 million, contingent on full transfer of operational authority and a 24-month non-compete agreement that would effectively make Ethan a silent figurehead in the company he had spent 9 years building. He turned the pages slowly, carefully, and somewhere between the 3rd and 4th clause he understood what this document actually was. It wasn't an acquisition offer. It was a replacement notice. They weren't buying NorthPath. They were retiring its founder. Gordon Alderton leaned forward then, folding his hands on the table with the calm precision of a man who had done this many times before. "You've accomplished something genuinely interesting," he said. His tone was warm in the way that expensive hotel lobbies are warm, designed, deliberate, entirely impersonal. NorthPath fills a real gap, niche, focused, the kind of operation that punches above its weight. He paused, just long enough. "But you're at a ceiling, Ethan. You know that. And men who built something small and then held on to it too long, they don't tend to recover from that mistake." No one laughed. It was subtler than that. Sylvia Alderton Crane looked up from her tablet for the first time, studied Ethan for a moment with a kind of clinical attention, then looked back down. One of the lawyers made a brief note. Another adjusted his pen. And the silence that followed was the loudest thing in the room. Ethan felt it the way it was designed to be felt, like a door being slowly closed on something. The years of early mornings and missed weekends. The version of himself that had eaten cold rice at 11 at night because there wasn't time to reheat it. The specific fear of checking his bank balance in the parking lot of a grocery store in 2017 and making decisions about what to put back on the shelf. All of that reduced in this room to something interesting, something niche, something small. And then his hand moved instinctively to the inside pocket of his jacket. He wasn't sure why. His phone was there, and he didn't pull it out entirely, just enough to feel the edge of the case. And on the lock screen, barely visible at that angle, was a photo he'd set 6 months ago and hadn't changed. His daughter, Nadia, 9 years old, sitting cross-legged on the dock at his sister's place near Lake Nipissing, holding up a fish she'd caught with 2 hands and a grin that took up most of her face. She was wearing a life jacket 3 sizes too big, and she didn't care even slightly. Something in his chest settled. Not louder, not harder. Just steadier. When he looked back up, Gordon Alderton was still watching him with that patient, measured expression. The offer still sat on the table. The money still existed in the air of the room like something real. But something had shifted inside Ethan Corbett. He wasn't the man being evaluated anymore. He was the man deciding. He closed the document. The sound of it was small, but in a room that quiet it landed. Every set of eyes lifted. "I appreciate the offer," Ethan said. His voice came out steadier than he expected. "But what you're describing isn't an acquisition. It's a retirement package." He slid the document back toward the center of the table. "And I'm 37. Sylvia Alderton Crane set down her tablet for the first time. Gordon Alderton's expression didn't change exactly, but something behind it did. A recalculation. A slight narrowing. "You should think carefully about this," Gordon said. Not threatening. Something quieter and therefore more pointed. "The window on an offer like this doesn't stay open." Ethan stood, buttoned his jacket, and picked up the folder he'd brought that he hadn't needed to open. "I understand," he said. "Thank you for your time." And he walked out. The elevator was mirrored on 3 sides. He stood in it for 11 floors before he exhaled, not because he was afraid exactly, but because the weight of what he had just done was beginning to register in a way that was entirely physical, a pressure behind his sternum, a cold awareness spreading through the back of his hands. $340 million. He had just said no to $340 million. The street outside the Caldwell Tower was loud in the specific way downtown Toronto is loud on a Thursday afternoon. Sirens. Somewhere north, a jackhammer 2 blocks west, the hiss of a bus pulling away from the curb. The world was completely indifferent to what had just happened in that room. Nobody on the sidewalk looked at him twice. His phone buzzed. A text from Nadia's school, a reminder about a science fair presentation next Friday that he had promised to attend, underlined in a text message from his sister that simply read, "Don't you dare miss this one." He stared at it for a moment on the sidewalk, traffic moving past him. Then he tucked the phone back in his pocket and walked to the parking garage. He lived in a semi-detached house in the East End, the kind of neighborhood where the porches were narrow and the yards were small and people left their hockey sticks out on the front step in winter and nobody took them. He had bought it 4 years ago when NorthPath had just crossed its first significant revenue threshold. It wasn't a large house. It had a kitchen that was too small for the amount of time Nadia spent in it and a backyard that flooded every spring. He loved it with a steadiness that surprised him sometimes. He was late and Nadia was already home, sitting at the kitchen table with her backpack still half on, working through a page of long division with the particular concentration she brought to things she found annoying. She heard the door. Didn't look up immediately. "You're later than you said," she noted. "I know," Ethan said. He hung up his jacket. "I'm sorry." She looked up then, taking in his face with the directness that children had, not rude, just unfiltered. "Did something bad happen?" He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. "Something complicated," he said. "Not bad. Those are sometimes the same thing," Nadia said, and went back to her long division. He watched her work for a moment, the way she tapped her pencil against the table when she was thinking. The eraser marks on her worksheet where she'd made a mistake and corrected it herself without frustration. She was 9 years old and she already had his stubbornness, which he recognized with both pride and something like apology. "Someone offered me a lot of money today," he said quietly. She didn't look up immediately. "How much?" "A lot." "Did you take it?" "No." She considered that, still looking at her worksheet. Why not? He thought about how to answer that in a way that was honest without being too heavy. "Because they wanted to take the company too," he said. "And the company is ours." Nadia looked up at him then, not surprised. More like confirming something she had already suspected. "Ours like me and you ours?" "Something like that." She nodded slowly like she was filing that away. Then she turned her worksheet around and pushed it toward him. "Can you check question 7? I think the answer is wrong, but I've done it twice." He looked at it. She was right that the answer was wrong. She was also right that she'd done the arithmetic correctly, and the issue was how she'd set up the equation. He explained it. She listened. She tried it again. She got it. Later, after dinner, pasta that he'd made too much of and frozen portions of, a habit he'd developed in Nadia's early years and never broken. They were on the couch with the television on low, and Nadia had her legs across his lap in the way she had, taking up more space than her size justified. "Dad," she said, not looking away from the TV. "Yeah, the company's okay, right? Like we're okay?" He looked at her profile, the specific shape of her nose, which was her mother's, the way she was trying to ask the question without asking the question. "Yeah," he said. "We're okay." She nodded once, satisfied, and didn't ask anything else. But Ethan sat there after she fell asleep, the television still on, his phone face down on the cushion beside him, and he allowed himself to feel the full shape of what he had done. Because it wasn't just the offer he had walked away from. It was the pressure behind it, the implication that there would be consequences, that the Alderton Group did not take rejection quietly. Gordon Alderton had not built a 70-year business empire by accepting no with grace. He had walked into that room as a man being evaluated. And now, somewhere in the quiet of that mirrored boardroom, a different calculation was beginning. By the following Monday, the shape of it was visible. It didn't arrive as a confrontation. It never did with people like the Alderton Group. It arrived as friction. A government infrastructure tender that NorthPath had been shortlisted for, a contract Ethan had spent 4 months preparing, quietly pulled from active consideration without explanation. A logistics partner in Calgary who had been in final discussions with them, a deal weeks from signing, suddenly requesting more time to review internal priorities. An investment firm in Waterloo that had expressed strong interest in NorthPath's next funding round, now unresponsive to calls that had been returned within hours just 2 weeks before. Individually, each one could have been coincidence. Together, they told a story. His operations manager, Priya, who had been with NorthPath since year 2 and who had the particular skill of seeing pattern before anyone else did, appeared at his office door on Monday afternoon and closed it behind her, which she only did when the news was bad enough to not want overheard. "Something's wrong with the Waterloo file," she said. "I know," Ethan said. "The Calgary partner, too. I know." She sat down across from him and set her laptop on his desk. "Is this connected to the Alderton meeting?" He didn't answer that directly, which was answer enough. Priya had worked with him long enough to read his silences. "Okay," she said, in the tone she used when she was accepting information she found unpleasant and moving to the next question. "What's the play?" And then the team meeting on Tuesday morning, which he had called but hadn't fully prepared for, not the way he usually prepared. Because there were parts of this he still didn't know how to say. They were 8 people in the room. His core team, ops, development, finance, logistics coordination, people who had stayed through the lean years, who had turned down better-paying offers elsewhere because they believed in the direction of the thing. And now they were sitting across from him with the particular alertness of people who had heard enough through the walls to know that something was happening, but not yet what. His CFO, a measured man named Stuart Whalen, who had joined 3 years ago from a Bay Street firm and who chose his words the way a watchmaker chose components, leaned forward first. "Talk to us, Ethan." Ethan talked. He told them about the Alderton offer. He told them what he had decided and why. He watched their faces as he spoke, the small shifts of expression, the moment where confusion gave way to understanding and then in some cases to something more complicated. 340, Stuart said when Ethan got to the number. Not a question. Just making sure he'd heard correctly. "Yes." Stuart leaned back. Quiet for a moment then. "And you said no, I said no." The room was silent in the way that meant people were processing rather than reacting. And then Oliver, his lead developer, 29, 6'2", the kind of person who ran ultra-marathons for reasons nobody fully understood, said flatly, "They're coming after the partnerships. Yes, because you said no, most likely." Oliver looked at the table for a moment. "So we've got no Waterloo capital, no Calgary contract, and the federal tender's gone quiet." He looked up. "What's actually left?" It was a fair question. It was the question Ethan had been sitting with since Sunday night, the one he had been working through in his head while Nadia slept against his shoulder. And it was the kind of question that, if he didn't have a real answer for, would undo everything he had stood for in that boardroom. 48 hours, Ethan said. "Give me 48 hours. Stuart studied him. The rest of the room was very still. "That's not an answer," Stuart said. "That's a delay." "I know," Ethan said. "It's also so what I'm asking for." Stuart exhaled. 48 hours, he said, and it wasn't exactly agreement, but it wasn't refusal either. It was trust, held out carefully the way you hold something fragile over a long drop. Ethan went back to his office, closed the door, and he started making calls. Not the calls anyone would expect, not to the investors who had gone quiet, not to the partners who were suddenly reviewing their internal priorities. He called people he had not spoken to in a long time. Former colleagues from early in his career who had moved into sectors the Alderton Group did not touch. A logistics innovator in Vancouver he had met at a conference in 2019 and stayed in cautious contact with ever since. A municipal procurement lead in Edmonton who had been quietly frustrated with the existing infrastructure software for years and had said so, twice to Ethan, in conversations that had never gone anywhere because the timing wasn't right. The timing, Ethan had decided, was now right. He also opened a file he kept on a local drive, not the cloud. A folder he had been building for 2 years methodically, without telling anyone on his team because he hadn't wanted to shift their focus before the foundation was solid. He called it quietly, internally, the extension, a modular upgrade to NorthPath's core system that expanded its capacity from supply chain logistics into infrastructure planning. Municipal, provincial, federal. A system that didn't just optimize what was moving, but predicted where it needed to move next, and flagged inefficiencies in public systems before they became crises. He had never released it because the timing had never been right, and because the right partners hadn't been in place. He spent 40 hours working with a focus that felt different from anything that had come before, not desperate, but purposeful in a way that was very nearly calm. Nadia's aunt, his sister Janet, picked Nadia up from school on Tuesday and kept her overnight. Ethan texted Nadia at 9:30 p.m., having a big work week. "Aunt Janet's for Tuesday night. I'll pick you up Wednesday after school." Nadia texted back a thumbs up and then, 3 minutes later, "Don't forget she has that dog now. Don't be weird about the dog." He smiled at his phone in his empty office at 9:45 at night and went back to work. By Wednesday evening, 3 things had happened. The Edmonton municipal lead had responded with a level of interest that Ethan would describe later only as significant. A conversation that had previously been theoretical had become in 40 hours a letter of intent. A former colleague in the transportation sector had made 2 introductions that led directly to a private infrastructure group in Ontario that had been looking for some time for exactly the kind of predictive planning architecture that NorthPath had quietly been building. And a conversation with the Vancouver contact had evolved with surprising speed into a proposed pilot project that, if it ran the way Ethan believed it would demonstrate the extension's capacity on a scale that no acquisition offer could easily absorb or dismiss. None of it was signed. None of it was finalized, but the shape of something was visible that hadn't been visible 72 hours before. And on Thursday morning, an email arrived from Sylvia Alderton Crane, brief, professional, requesting a follow-up conversation at Ethan's convenience. Not Gordon, Sylvia. That distinction Ethan recognized immediately was deliberate. He walked back into the Caldwell Tower on Friday morning. This time he took the elevator without checking the mirror. He knew what he looked like. He had slept 5 hours. He had dropped Nadia at school, listened to her talk for 10 minutes about a disagreement she'd had with her friend Maya about the rules of a game they'd invented, confirmed that she was right about the rules, and then driven downtown with the particular clarity that came from having done the thing you needed to do. He was shown into a smaller boardroom this time. Sylvia Alderton Crane was already seated. No lawyers this time, a single assistant who left the room almost immediately, and Gordon Alderton, not at the head of the table but to the side. That was new. Ethan sat down without waiting to be invited. He placed a slim folder on the table, but he didn't open it. "Thank you for coming," Sylvia said. Her tone was different, measured still, but the clinical distance from the first meeting had shifted into something more careful. "We've been watching your week with interest. I assumed you would be," Ethan said. Gordon looked at him with an expression that was harder to read than before. Not hostile, reassessing. He was a man who respected leverage, and somewhere in the last 48 hours he had encountered a version of it he hadn't anticipated. "You've been building something," Gordon said. "Not a question." "I've been building something for 2 years, Ethan said. "You saw the part I showed you. Last week you saw the part I brought to a $340 million conversation. This week you saw the part I showed everyone else." He paused. "Those aren't the same thing." The room was quiet. Sylvia leaned forward slightly. "The Edmonton letter isn't public," Ethan said, "but it's real and it's the beginning, not the end." Gordon Alderton was quiet for a long moment. He had the look of a man recalculating not just a number but a category. He had come into the first meeting expecting to buy something definable, something with edges he could see all the way around. What he was now looking at was something that had edges he hadn't found yet. "What do you want?" Sylvia asked. Direct, genuinely asking. Ethan didn't answer immediately. He let the question sit for a moment the way the silence had sat on him in this building the week before. He wanted them to feel it. Not out of spite, but because the answer mattered and he needed them to understand that he understood it mattered. "Partnership," he said finally. "Not acquisition. Not a buyout. A genuine stake with governance that reflects what I built and what I'm building, equal standing or close to it, and a structure that lets NorthPath grow in the direction I intend, not the direction a quarterly report recommends." Gordon's jaw shifted slightly. "That's not how we operate." "I know," Ethan said. "That's what I'm proposing." Another silence, longer this time. Sylvia looked at her father. Something passed between them, the specific nonverbal shorthand of people who had been reading each other across boardroom tables for many years. Gordon looked back at Ethan, and the expression on his face had changed again, not into agreement, not yet, but into something that was genuinely new for a room that had, until now, only ever produced the same kind of evaluation in the same direction. "We'll need to review the Edmonton documentation," Sylvia said. "I expected that," Ethan said. "And the Ontario Group also expected." "This isn't a decision we make in a room," Gordon said. His voice was quieter than it had been, more honest somehow. "I'm not asking you to," Ethan said. "I'm asking you to understand what you're actually looking at before you make it." He stood, picked up his folder, buttoned his jacket. Sylvia Alderton Crane stood as well. She held out her hand, and when he shook it, her grip was firm, and her expression was unreadable in a different way than it had been the week before. Not dismissive, but genuinely uncertain, which was not a look he suspected she wore often. "We'll be in touch, Mr. Corbett," she said. "I know you will," he said. He walked out of the Caldwell Tower for the second time. This time, the city didn't feel indifferent. It felt ordinary, which was better. The weeks that followed were not simple. They were not clean. There were more conversations, more negotiations, more moments where the math looked wrong and the margin looked thin, and his team sat in the conference room with the overhead light too bright and their coffees going cold. There were mornings when Ethan woke up before 5 and lay in the dark and ran the numbers in his head until they blurred. There was a Tuesday in November when a partner deal fell through at the final stage, and he sat in his car in a parking garage for 11 minutes and didn't go inside until he could trust his voice. And there were evenings when he came home and Nadia was at the kitchen table with homework or a book or her art supplies. And she looked up, and the specific quality of that moment, the way a room changes when someone you love is in it, was the thing that kept the rest of it in proportion. She drew things sometimes the way kids do. Pictures of houses and animals and things she was thinking about. One evening in early December, she showed him a drawing she'd done of their house. Recognizable, accurately proportioned, the porch with the slightly crooked railing he kept meaning to fix. And in the drawing, he was standing on the porch, and beside him was a smaller figure he understood was her, and above the house she had written, in her uneven printing, "Our place." He looked at it for a while. He didn't say a great deal. He didn't need to. She tilted her head and studied him in that way she had. "Do you like it?" "Very much," he said. She nodded, satisfied, and took it back to add something else to it. He watched her draw and thought about the first meeting in that boardroom, the way the silence had been designed to make him feel reduced, the way the number on the cover sheet was meant to make everything feel already decided, and how none of that had worked the way it was supposed to because there was a version of success that the Aldertons understood very well, and a version they had never needed to understand at all. The formal partnership agreement with the Alderton Group was signed the following spring. It was not the deal they had first proposed. It was, in most of the ways that mattered, the deal Ethan had asked for, not without compromise, not without difficult months in between, but real. The Edmonton pilot launched that summer. The Ontario Infrastructure Group came on board in the fall. NorthPath was no longer a niche operation punching above its weight. It was a platform. And on the evening of the day the partnership was officially finalized, Ethan picked Nadia up from her after-school program, took her to the Portuguese place on Dundas that she liked, and let her order the custard tart for dessert before dinner because it was that kind of day. She ate it in 2 careful bites and then looked at him across the table with the directness he had come to recognize as her specific way of seeing him clearly. "Did the big work thing end okay?" she asked. He thought about the boardroom, the silence, the number on the cover sheet, the 40 hours of calls from an empty office, the parking garage, the way Sylvia Alderton Crane had shaken his hand with an expression she had to learn on the spot. "Yeah," he said, "it ended okay." Nadia considered that, nodded once, and reached for the menu to order a second custard tart. He let her. Outside, the city was moving the way it always did, indifferent, constant, enormous. And somewhere inside that ordinary evening, in a booth at a restaurant on Dundas Street with bad lighting and good pastry, Ethan Corbett understood something he hadn't had words for in the boardroom, something that couldn't be entered into a contract or captured in a valuation. That the thing worth protecting had never been the company. It was the ability to still be himself when the company was done.